Can you also
And
make
I
it
will,
so I can share?
yes. So now you should be able to share, and Ellen will do a brief introduction.
All right, we have Colleen Mirabello with us. She's been a resident of Sharon for nearly 12 years, and she's a recent member of Sustainable Sharon. Welcome.
Thank you.
And she has a background in tech, and she worked for 20 years as a full stack web developer at a small software company in Boston. In 2021, she left her job as CTO of that company to take some time off. And in October 2022, she began Terra.do's Learning for Action course, a 12-week online climate change boot camp. And we're really excited to have her with us.
Thanks so much. Can you all see my presentation?
We can.
Okay. So I will skip this slide since I have been introduced. And I'll also say I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but I'm going to not look at the chat so it doesn't distract me. So if you all have questions, just afterwards, I will be happy to answer them.
And if
All right,
everyone
so
can
tonight-
mute while you're, if everyone can mute, please. And that way we won't distract you even more. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so tonight I will be talking about my experience in Terra.do's Learning for Action course, a 12-week online bootcamp focused on climate change and its potential solutions. So the overall gist of the course is the following. Climate change is happening, it's going to be bad, a whole lot of people are working on it, and you can be one of them. So to back up a bit, Terra.do was founded in 2020. And the story goes that one of their founders, Anshuman, was at a coffee shop called Terra. He was expressing his concerns about climate change to the person he was with, and someone overheard him and approached him and said, if you're worried about climate change, you should talk to my sister-in-law. And that sister-in-law was Kamal. And so together, it connected them and they started Terra.do with the goal of getting 100 million people working in climate by 2030. Terra actually offers several different courses. So a friend of mine who works for Mass Audubon out in Northampton sent me information about their climate wayfinding program in the fall of 2022. And as we said, I was a year into my break from work and starting to think about what was next. So I applied for the wayfinding program. But they actually thought I would be a better fit for the Learning for Action course. So I figured that was worth a try and signed up for that. But I really had no idea what experience I was going to be in for. Learning in the class takes many forms. So the actual class information is presented in 20 classes, which are all broken into smaller modules that take from 5 to 60 minutes to get through. Those classes are slide decks that present information with written information, graphs, videos, links to articles, links to Twitter threads, and they release on a set schedule that you can go through at your own pace. So there was usually one on Tuesday and one on Friday of each week. There is also a weekly lab session at a specific time, and you can determine you can tell them your preferences for what your time zone is, what time of day you want, and they attempt to put you in a time slot that works for you. And in those labs, you talk about the topics from the classes in more depth. So the whole entire cohort of the group that started at the same time as me was about 150 people. At the time, it was the biggest cohort they had. They just keep getting bigger. But the lab group was about 20 to 30 people. And each group got our own instructor who led our discussions and was available to help us if we had questions or were struggling with assignments. And for a lot of us, the labs were really our favorite part of the week because we got to share our thoughts on the material and really got to connect with our instructor and get to know the people in our smaller group. In any given week, there was usually a guest talk, usually on Wednesday or Wednesday morning or early afternoon for us. And a weekly deep dive lab on Thursday, where an instructor or a guest expert would go over some of the course material in more depth. The guest talks were usually required, but you could watch the recordings after the fact, and the deep dive labs were optional. All the calls were done over Zoom, and any mixed meeting could be watched later. So it was really possible to participate sort of asynchronously outside of the lab group. In addition to the information that we were presented with, the class involved 5 assignments, 3 of which were individual and 2 which were group assignments. And I'll get more into what the actual assignments were in later slides, but they were a really good way to force us to be thoughtful about the material and our place in the climate fight. And finally, Terra has a Slack workspace where fellows of the current and past cohorts can interact. The instructors are all available to answer questions, and this is where they would remind us what was coming up for the week and where we would talk about things outside of the lab group. So all of this learning is managed on an app that they have custom built for them that tracks what parts of the course you have and have not completed. So it makes it really easy to tell what's coming up, what you've done, what you have left to do. There's a nice little progress bar that would complete as you went through the class. And just as an aside, you're probably going to see this in some of my screenshots. The cohort I was in was called Xeris, which I guess is some kind of ground squirrel. They named their cohorts after endangered species going alphabetically, but they started with monarch, so it starts at M, but the one before me was whale sharks. The ones after were yaks and zebra, and I think axolotl is coming up starting in a couple weeks. They also have several calendars you can subscribe to, one for the whole organization, one for the cohort, one for the lab group. So it was really easy for me just to integrate that with my regular calendar and see what was coming up alongside my normal schedule. So to get into more specifics about what they taught us, just one note, when I say climate change is happening, I mean humans are causing climate change. I don't mean that the climate is just changing, and that was definitely an important part of the class. So the start of the class taught us the basic science of climate change. We learned about the carbon cycle, what greenhouse gases are, why they trap heat from the sun. We even had to do some math about, calculate how you would calculate the average temperature of a sphere, and how you convert from carbon to carbon dioxide quantities. So it was math I hadn't learned since, or hadn't used since college going on there. And they also got into the different kinds of greenhouse gases, the varying levels of potency, how long they stay around in the atmosphere. So we really started out with a fundamental understanding of what is happening to the planet and why it's happening. We also talked in depth about climate models, how they work, their strengths and weaknesses, and how over time we can compare their predictions to what actually happens to see how well they work in forecasting the future. This provided a really strong counter to the comments you hear, like, well, scientists predict a lot of things that don't come true. And it really showed how much work, science, and computing power goes into the predictions that have happened in the past several decades and are continuing. And this is just a graph that really struck me in one of the guest talks that shows kind of the temperature variability of the planet over time. And I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it kind of was really hot and then it varied a lot. But during this green section, which is the time of human civilization, it has been pretty consistent. And then you can see at the end, it's really going up. So I felt like that was a really effective way to communicate the temperature change that's happening. So once we were sufficiently grounded in the science of what's going on, we started to talk about what the outcomes of that are going to be. This took the form of some courses about the current and future impacts of climate change, both at a global and more localized level. We also had an assignment, a guest talk, and a workshop that went along with this material. The assignment was our first group assignment in which we were matched up with a few other people in our lab to answer some questions about what people in our local context think about climate change and its impacts. So this assignment was really interesting because the lab group I was in spanned the globe. So we got to hear perspectives from people in so many other places. The group that I was assigned to had me here in Massachusetts, a woman from Costa Rica who currently lives in the Netherlands, and 2 men from India, one of whom lived in a big city and another one who lived in kind of like a gated community that was really isolated from the kind of goings on of climate change in that area. So it was really fascinating to hearing what they were all dealing with locally and what people around them were thinking about and doing about climate change. And it also led me to have to Google, what do people in Massachusetts think about climate change? And then being shocked that a lot of them don't think it's a problem. In fact, more of them don't think it's a problem now than did a few years ago, which was really surprising to me, and showed me just how much work there is still to do here locally. The guest talks on this topic, a guest talk was given by Dr. Chip Fletcher, who is actually an academic advisor to Terra. And this was a pretty pivotal moment in the course. In this talk, Dr. Fletcher goes through a long list of how climate change and other human behaviors are affecting the planet now and will affect it in the future. The talk was pretty devastating, although he did have a few uplifting bits of news at the end, including the possibility that Russia's war in Ukraine might cause us to reach peak fossil fuel usage sooner than was predicted. I actually didn't watch this talk in real time because it was 11 o'clock on Halloween night. But the next morning, my lab mates were pretty shell-shocked by it, and some of them reported that they hadn't been able to sleep after watching this. So I made sure to watch it, early in the day. There was a big gap before bedtime, and that definitely it lessened the shock because I knew it was going to be kind of shocking. I think that that's sort of the intention of this talk, is that it's meant to be a real wake-up call to people and get them invested. Shortly thereafter, we had a talk with Nikita Palasani about emotional resilience and climate change. So this included talks about eco-anxiety, eco-grief, this really interesting concept I hadn't heard of before called solastalgia, which is the homesickness you have when you're still at home. So when your environment is changing and you miss the way it used to be. So I think of this like, there used to be so many lightning bugs when I was younger, and now there's not as many. And, so that feeling of longing for what it used to be like is solastalgia. The workshop was pretty intense. There was crying. There's a lot of people with kids who find this whole thing upsetting. But we came out of it with some coping mechanisms and a stronger bond between the group because we'd shared some of our emotions. And I think the fact that it came right after that talk by Dr. Fletcher shows that they really are intentionally constructing this class. They knew we'd be upset by that talk, and they gave us some tools to deal with that. So the whole course was really put together very intentionally and thoughtfully, and that was an example of that. So once we got through the really dark stuff, we moved on to solutions. But before we got into the actual sciencey solutions, they made sure we had some background in important topics like communication, climate justice, economics and development, systems thinking. The problem of climate change was presented as being very complex and intertwined with all kinds of other social and economic issues. So they made sure we understood that there are costs to any climate solution, and it's important to consider and involve the people affected by those solutions. And then these concepts became a thread that ran through all of the classes after that point. So then we learned about the sciencey solutions, renewable energy, electrifying everything, food systems, farming, carbon offsets, and carbon removal. We also talked about the financial situation and how corporations fit into the equation. And finally, we discussed adaptation and resilience, which are necessary because the climate is going to keep changing even if we aggressively decrease emissions. Our assignment in this area was a research project that we did as a group. So everybody got either chose or put into categories about what solution we wanted to investigate, and we all researched them in more depth and then presented them to each other. So it gave us an opportunity to learn more about a solution we were particularly interested in, and then to hear more from our lab mates about the other solutions out there. We also got to play with this really cool simulator, the En-ROAD simulator, to see the potential effects that different solutions could have on the forecasted global temperature. If you put the URL there, I would recommend checking this out if you haven't seen it before. It's really interesting to see what affects the temperature a lot and what barely affects the temperature. And we also heard a talk from Dr. Semel Huck about the COP27 summit that was going on at the same time my cohort was happening. He talked a lot about loss and damage, which is the idea that countries who have contributed more to climate change should contribute financially to countries that are suffering the worst effects from it. And it sounds like a lot of progress was made on a lot of fronts at COP27, which it was encouraging to hear that from him. So once we heard about all these solutions and all of these people working in the climate space, the question for us to answer was, how would we contribute? So the class is called Learning for Action. They wanted to make sure that we thought about how we were going to take action after the class. And several of the assignments that we did played into this idea. So our first assignment, which was the very beginning of the class, we were invited to imagine a future where climate change is solved. It's 2040 and we fixed it. And sort of envision what we had done to contribute to that solution. So it got us thinking about how we uniquely could contribute to the solution. The third assignment, we had to think about why we were taking the class and sort of choose a path from an assortment of here to learn, create, here for a job, here to act, or here to lead. And then based on the path, we had to do certain tasks. So I chose here for a job, and I had to look up several organizations I might be interested in working for and write a cover letter to one of them, which I did not send. But I actually ended up picking Mass Audubon because I think that they're a really interesting organization. My friend works there. So it was a helpful exercise to start me thinking about getting back into the workforce. And then our final assignment, we were asked to create a plan for ourselves going forward and share that with some of the people in our lab group. And this made us think about concrete steps we could take and commit to them, which I think probably results in more action on behalf of the fellows after the course is done, because we said we're going to do this thing. And actually doing this presentation tonight was one of the things on my action plan. In addition to the assignments, we had several people talk to us about transitioning to a climate career. And they also told us how to start a green team at work. They have a mentorship program we could take advantage of to get matched up with a mentor to help us in our climate journey. And there's actually a decent number of people in the Boston area who are part of Terra, either current or former fellows or thinking about joining. So we actually had a community event a few weeks ago where we met up in Boston, and that is hopefully going to be a relatively regular thing to keep the connections going. So going forward, if you would be interested in taking this course, or someone you know might be interested, new cohorts start every 6 weeks. And if you are interested in signing up, there's probably one starting soon that you can apply for. I think the next one is starting on the 20th. The course is not free. It costs just under $2,000 at the time of this presentation, but there are scholarships, both merit and need-based, that are available. And you can also, if you use my full name when you sign up, you get 25% off. And I'm not being paid to advertise this. This is how it works. So I would definitely recommend the class to anyone, with some caveats. You need time. So the course description says it's a 6 to 12 hour per week investment, and I think that is accurate. My husband, when I did this for him today, told me he thought it was more than that, but I think I don't think it was more than that. The required lab session is a 90-minute call, and there are usually 3 to 5 hours of other presentations and talks you can participate live in or watch later per week. Then you add in the reading the class materials, which can be a huge rabbit hole if you really are interested in a topic and you follow every link and read every article that they link to. So that can really add up. So as the class went on, it became apparent that those of us who weren't working and didn't have other schooling going on were much more caught up than the ones who were trying to do a full-time job and do the class. So to really get the most out of the class, you do need the time to devote to it. You also need to be able to just kind of sit and read a lot. The classes are broken into modules, which makes them less daunting. You can kind of do one and then go have lunch and come back. But it still was a lot of reading. The slides often link to articles, which can sometimes get quite technical. So you need to be the kind of person who can sit at your computer and just quietly read a lot of information. You also need to be able to stay focused. And I definitely struggled with this because I was on my computer and there's Facebook and there's Slack and there's all these other distractions. Also, the class is linked to Twitter threads a lot. There are a lot of scientists who share a lot of scientific information on Twitter. That was interesting, but then I would read that and then I would be like, oh, this person's trending. Did they die? And like, I'd be watching baby lion cub videos and not actually doing the class. So if you need to be able to just like rein it in and focus on what you're reading. And finally, you need to be able to keep an open mind. Even if you're already in agreement that humans are causing climate change and we need to do something about it, there still may be something in the group that you don't agree with, or someone in a lab or other discussion expressing something that rubs you the wrong way. Terra is a very supportive community. They don't tolerate people mistreating each other or instructors. I actually never saw this happen, but I did see it mentioned on Slack, so I guess it happens. So you need to be able to approach it in an open and supportive way. But if you do decide to take the course, you'll come out with a great overview of what's going on in the climate space, an ability to discriminate what's actually helpful and what's not, which is a major reason that I wanted to take this. I didn't want to jump into a job at a place that wasn't actually helping. A network of people literally all over the planet, and access to job opportunities in the climate space. So if after all that you're interested in learning more, you can email me or look me up on LinkedIn. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Colleen. Let's all give her a round of applause. Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. I'm sure there are questions, so go ahead, everyone, and ask away. I'll start. Did you, if someone has a hand up, I just don't see it. So feel free to put your microphone on and say something, but I'm wondering, Colleen, did you say that you worked with these people in your group from all over the world? Did you get a sense, did you have a time? First of all, that's always tricky with what time you would meet. But then did you say that some people didn't believe climate change was happening, or everyone in your group was?
Oh no, the people in the group definitely did.
Yeah.
It was more when I looked up people in Massachusetts was that I encountered that some percentage of those people didn't. Yeah. As for the time frame, when you sign up, you can say this is my availability, and then they would kind of assign you trying to match that. It just happened, I guess, that some of the people in India wanted to do this right before bedtime, or some of the people on the West Coast of the US wanted to do it first thing in the morning. So we'd get on these calls and we had people from literally 9 p.m. to like 7 a.m., all involved in the same conversation.
That's great. Paul?
Yeah, Colleen, great presentation, very exciting program. Can you share any examples of what graduates have done with this education once they get done and start applying what they learned? Are there any stories about what graduates have tackled to
That is a
solve?
good question. I know some of them do go on to work for Terra. There were definitely some people who were instructors who would just say, I was in this cohort and now I'm teaching. I know that there are people who have gone on to work in climate. I don't know specific examples, but in Slack, there are channels where people will say, I just wanted to share that I just got a job at this. And so definitely, there are people who go on to work in climate from the class. Right now, I'm actually participating. They sort of added on this 4-week career class, which I didn't put in my presentation because they don't know if they're going to do it again or when. That is designed to get our resumes in order, our cover letters, like teach us how to clean up LinkedIn, and network and how to apply for things. So I think that they're always iterating. And I think they got some feedback that people would take the class and then be like, whoa, now what? And so they're trying to help us take the next step to actually get jobs in climate.
What about volunteer work as
Um,
opposed to jobs?
I mean, I suspect that is going on. I don't specifically know. I've definitely, because of you all, suggested that people look up their local sustainability groups and get involved. I am not sure specifically.
Thank you.
Great, Ralph.
Yeah, I'll ask. Yeah, so Colleen also, yeah, thank you. I mean, there's so much information out there. I'm just impressed that anybody can sit down and develop a curriculum because it's overwhelming how much information is out there right now. And it's good that they got into solutions from the science side and other things. Did they talk about advocacy and, from Extinction Rebellion groups? And in Boston, there's a lot of advocacy groups that are dealing legislatively or direct action going at the utility companies. How do they feel about that kind of, not science, just politics and people in the street action?
Yeah, they talked, there were some classes on politics. I feel like I probably didn't pay as much attention to, just because I'm not naturally like a go stand with a picket sign kind of person. But that was definitely one of the potential paths, was kind of like here to get involved and speak out and act like in that capacity. So that was definitely, I don't remember them specifically talking about Extinction Rebellion, but definitely, if a path that people could go down after this class.
Good, thanks.
Liz? You're muted.
Mute.
Liz, you're muted.
Sorry. Where did you get your information about Massachusetts and that poll about who actually is concerned about climate change and everything?
So I literally just Googled, what do people in Massachusetts think about climate change? Because I thought it was going to be like, they're all very concerned. And then there was, I think it was in the Globe. It was a poll that was done fairly recently, like post-COVID. I think it was April of 2022. And I can try to find it and share it. And it was surprising to me. There was another one that I found where people were specifically asked, do you think that you will be directly affected by climate change? And half of them said no. And it was kind of like, you already are.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it was, it was disturbing, but it was also like, okay, there's things that I can do here to help educate people. It doesn't involve me having to like travel or, invent something to save the world. Like, there are people locally
unfortunately, yes, that's true.
Yes. I will also say, related to that they really made the point that this whole movement is picking up enough momentum that little percent that doesn't believe in it doesn't really matter anymore. And they actually don't advise trying to convince people who straight up don't believe it, because they're like, you're not going to convince them. It's a waste of your time and it doesn't matter. The world is already moving towards renewables. There's so many people working on this. Obviously there needs to be more people, but focus on the hesitant people, not the non-believers, which was kind of a relief to hear, honestly.
Thank you.
Colleen, how has this changed you? What are you doing differently in your career and personal life?
So that probably has a lot of answers. I'm in this career class. I just made a resume for the first time since 2011. It's a little nerve-wracking. If you all see me LinkedIn connecting to you, this is why. So I'm, hoping to get into something. I'm kind of interested in the electrify everything concept. And personally, honestly, it's made me feel a lot better. And I think that probably seems like a strange thing to say when I just, learned all these horrible things that are expected to happen to the planet. But just knowing that there are so many people all over the world getting involved in this was a huge relief to me, because I think we as Americans we get in our heads that like we need to save the world. Like Americans are the ones who think up the things and do the things, and if we're not doing it, it's not happening. And then to just connect to all these people and know that so many things are happening, and they're going to take care of their countries, and they're going to figure out their solutions that work in their context, and we just need to focus, you know, on doing the right thing where we are. It was just, it was a huge relief. So, I mean, there's still a lot to be anxious about, but I personally feel like energized to get involved as opposed to staying up all night because I am freaked out. So I think it's been a really great experience.
That's awesome. Any more questions? All right, well, let's thank Colleen again. We really appreciate you sharing this with us.